From public executions to brutal corporal punishments, discover the shocking methods the French used to maintain control over their colonies. Methods that left a dark legacy still felt today. The French Colonial Empire, vast and expansive, spanned across numerous territories, each with its own diverse cultures, societies, and populations. Yet, despite the differences between these colonies, one thing unified them: control. The French maintained authority in these distant lands not just through legal frameworks and governance, but through fear, violence, and a strict system of punishment designed to uphold the hierarchy of the empire. For those under French rule, punishment wasn't merely a method to restore order. It was a way to assert dominance, maintain control, and remind colonial subjects of their subjugated position. Today, we'll explore some of the most shocking and brutal methods of discipline employed by the French colonial authorities, from public humiliation to corporal punishment, and even execution. These methods were not just tools of authority. They embodied the mindset of the era, a time when colonial power was maintained not just by law, but through cruelty, fear, and domination. Caning and flogging, symbols of control. Perhaps some of the most common and emblematic forms of punishment in the French colonies were flogging and caning. These corporal punishments were prevalent throughout the French Empire, as they were across many European colonial holdings. However, in the case of France, caning became particularly associated with the colonial experience, especially in regions like Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Caribbean. The French employed flogging and caning to enforce their control over the indigenous populations, treating them as subordinates with little regard for their humanity. These punishments were often enforced under the legal system established by the Code de l'Indigénat, a body of laws introduced in 1881 that effectively segregated colonial subjects from French citizens and gave the French authorities significant powers to discipline, punish, and humiliate them. Under the Code de l'Indigénat, the colonizers held broad powers to impose physical punishment on indigenous populations for offenses that could range from minor infractions to outright rebellion against French rule. Flogging and caning were regularly used, and they were not just designed to inflict pain. They were also tools of humiliation. These punishments were often carried out in front of large crowds, reinforcing the social and political hierarchy that placed the colonizers at the top and the colonized at the bottom. The public nature of these punishments was a stark reminder to the indigenous populations of their place in the empire, a place marked by subjugation and fear. The guillotine, a tool of terror. The guillotine, a symbol of the French Revolution's call for egalitarian justice, ironically became a tool of terror in the French colonies. Though it was originally introduced as a more humane method of execution during the Revolution, it quickly transformed into a psychological weapon for the French colonial state. Executions by guillotine were carried out in public squares, often with large crowds gathered to witness the spectacle. The French colonial authorities believed that these public executions would instill fear among the local populations and act as a deterrent to rebellion. In some colonies like Algeria, Indochina, and Senegal, the guillotine was used not only to punish criminals, but also to silence political dissidents, rebels, and those who opposed the colonial regime. The guillotine became synonymous with the brutal enforcement of colonial rule. Though it was designed for swift and efficient execution, the impact of watching someone's life taken so quickly in front of a crowd had far-reaching psychological consequences. The guillotine symbolized the unyielding power of the French state and served as a grim reminder that dissent would not be tolerated. By the mid-20th century, the guillotine was phased out, but its legacy as an instrument of terror continued to haunt the colonies long after its official use ceased. The breaking wheel, a symbol of extreme brutality. While the guillotine might be the most well-known execution tool associated with French colonial rule, it was not the only method of punishment that instilled fear among the colonial populations. In the early years of French colonialism, particularly in the Caribbean and Louisiana, the breaking wheel, or Catherine wheel, was employed as one of the most gruesome forms of punishment. This method involved tying a person to a large wooden wheel, then systematically breaking their limbs before finally killing them. The process was intentionally slow and agonizing, designed to prolong the suffering of the condemned. Though the breaking wheel was not used widely in the later years of French colonialism, its reputation for cruelty persisted long after its use had dwindled. The fear it instilled among the colonial subjects was palpable, as this brutal punishment served as a constant reminder of the power of the French authorities and the consequences of defying them. One of the most notorious figures in this grim history was Louis Congo, a black executioner in New Orleans during the 18th century. Congo, who was an enslaved person himself, was tasked with carrying out executions, including those by breaking on the wheel, which further illustrated the complex and twisted power dynamics at play in French colonial society. Branding with hot irons, a mark of ownership. Another painful and dehumanizing punishment was branding. The practice of branding individuals with hot irons was common in the French colonies, particularly in regions like Haiti, where it was often used to mark enslaved Africans as property. Branding was a brutal form of punishment intended to dehumanize the individual and remind them of their status as property. Enslaved individuals who attempted to escape, who were rebellious, or who committed theft, would often find themselves branded with the initials of their masters or with symbols of French authority. This practice was deeply ingrained in the colonial system, serving not only as punishment, but also as a constant psychological reminder of their subjugation. Branding was officially abolished in France in 1832, yet it continued to be used in the colonies long after that, especially during the Haitian Revolution, where the scars left by branding became symbols of the cruelty of French colonialism. The trauma inflicted by this practice, both physical and psychological, contributed to the growing resistance movements in the colonies, which ultimately led to the end of French rule in places like Haiti. Forced labor camps, exploitation of the colonized. The French Colonial Empire also relied heavily on forced labor, which was integral to the exploitation of both natural resources and human labor. Forced labor camps were established in colonies like French Guiana, Madagascar, and West Africa, where indigenous populations were subjected to grueling work conditions under harsh oversight. These labor camps were often used as a form of punishment for political dissidents, criminals, and those who resisted colonial rule. The infamous Devil's Island, located off the coast of French Guiana, became the most notorious example of a forced labor camp. Prisoners, many of whom were political prisoners, were subjected to harsh conditions that included malnutrition, disease, and backbreaking labor. The conditions on Devil's Island were so brutal that the camp became a symbol of the extreme lengths to which the French colonial authorities would go to suppress opposition. The labor camps were not only places of punishment, but also acted as deterrents for others who might consider defying colonial rule. While some prisoners might have been sent to these camps as a result of their criminal activities, others were simply dissenters or individuals who sought to challenge the colonial system. The pillory, public humiliation. Public humiliation was another common form of punishment in the French colonies, and the pillory was a key tool in this form of discipline. The pillory was a device that would immobilize an individual by locking their head and hands in a wooden or metal frame. The person would then be exposed in a public space where they would endure not only the physical discomfort of being trapped in the pillory, but also the shame of public exposure. In the colonies, the pillory was often used to punish indigenous populations, enslaved people, or laborers. Unlike in France, where pillories might be used for minor offenses in the colonies, this punishment was often accompanied by additional cruelty, such as beatings or being pelted with stones by onlookers. The pillory became particularly notorious in the Caribbean colonies, such as Saint-Domingue, later Haiti, where enslaved individuals who defied their masters or colonial laws were subjected to this punishment. For these individuals, the pillory served as both a public spectacle and a constant reminder of the punishment for rebellion or even minor acts of disobedience. Though its use began to wane in the early 19th century, the pillory remains a symbol of the humiliation and brutal control exerted by the French colonial authorities. The legacy of French colonial punishments. These extreme forms of punishment reflect the lengths to which the French colonial empire went to maintain its dominance over vast and diverse populations. The methods outlined above are just a few of the tools used to enforce a system of fear and control that shaped the experience of life in the colonies. While some of these punishments might seem unimaginable today, they were once viewed as necessary mechanisms to maintain colonial order in a period of fierce imperial competition. The brutal legacy of these practices remains a dark chapter in the history of colonialism. Understanding the nature of these punishments helps us explore the complexities of governance in a vast empire. It sheds light on the extreme methods used to enforce control and the deep inequalities that were at the heart of colonial rule. The suffering caused by these punishments cannot be understated, and the resistance they sparked eventually contributed to the downfall of French colonial dominance. While the empire has long since crumbled, the scars of its oppressive systems continue to resonate in the histories and memories of those who lived through them. If you're interested in exploring more untold stories from the past, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more historical insights. The legacy of these punishments serves as a reminder of the enduring struggle for freedom and equality that has shaped much of modern history.